A midlife crisis is more than just a cultural stereotype. It's a real psychological struggle that can surface between the ages of 40 and 60. Often triggered by aging, loss, or unmet expectations, it can actually lead individuals to question their identity, make impulsive choices, or abruptly abandon long term commitments. While not officially classified yet as a mental illness, the emotional and relational fallout is very real, especially for the spouses and families left behind. This podcast gives voice to those living through the aftermath, exposing the hidden pain and seeking accountability, healing, and understanding. Thank you for joining us today on MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. Hello, Bomb Squad. Welcome back to MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. Tonight's episode is one of the heaviest we've ever done because today we're going to be talking about something many left behind spouses are afraid to say out loud. And that's not only my spouse changed, but I'm actually worried about them. Worried because the new relationship that they're in seems chaotic, obsessive, emotionally unstable, isolating, manipulative, psychologically dangerous. And many listeners quietly ask, could this relationship actually destroy them? Because it can and it does. And remember, before we begin, this episode is for educational purposes only. We're just discussing behavioral patterns, trauma dynamics, attachment injuries, emotional dysregulation, and unhealthy relationship systems. We're not diagnosing specific individuals, but we are going to discuss something real. And that's sometimes the affair relationship formed during midlife crisis is not a healthy romance. Sometimes it becomes a psychological pressure cooker. And when emotional collapse intersects with emotional instability, things can become deeply toxic and explosive. So one of the reasons tunnel relationships feel so intense is because they often form inside an emotional bubble, separated from reality. Inside the bubble, secrecy creates excitement. Intensity feels like intimacy. Rebellion feels like freedom. And emotional fusion feels like destiny. The MLCer often believes that this person finally understands them. Meanwhile, the affair partner may believe, I finally found my soulmate. But what sometimes gets overlooked is that the relationship may not be forming under emotionally healthy conditions. It may be forming during depression, identity collapse, loneliness, unresolved trauma, addiction, emotional immaturity, or untreated personality pathology traits. And that means the bond can become less about true intimacy and more about just emotional regulation. Each person begins psychologically depending on the other to stabilize themselves. And that dependency can become incredibly unhealthy when two dysregulated people collide. This is something many left behind spouses intuitively sense long before anyone else does because they observe the volatility, the emotional chaos, the extreme dependence, the erratic behavior, constant crises, emotional explosions, bizarre decision making. And they think, oh my God, this doesn't feel stable. And you know what? They're usually right. Because typically the tunnel relationship is not a healthy, emotionally healthy person helping someone heal. It is actually two emotionally dysregulated people attaching to each other during collapse. And that can create a relationship fueled by trauma bonding, emotional addiction, rescuing, fear of abandonment, identity instability, fantasy projection, and dependency. And what happens with that? The results are extreme highs, extreme lows, intense attachment, and intense conflict. And what outsiders may mistake for passion may actually be emotional dysregulation. Many tunnel relationships begin with rescue fantasies. That's where one person becomes the victim, the misunderstood spouse, the wounded soul, the trapped person, finally trying to escape. And the other becomes the savior, the healer, the emotional caretaker, the one who understands. And this creates an instant emotional fusion. The relationship begins feeling heroic, almost cinematic, us against the world. But rescue-based relationships, you guys, often become unstable because eventually the rescuer becomes exhausted and the victim never fully stabilizes. It's just constant chaos. Resentment develops, dependency deepens, and emotional regulation gets outsourced onto the relationship itself. And now both people are emotionally trapped inside the same unstable system. And this is where many bomb squad members become deeply concerned because sometimes the affair partner themselves may show signs of unresolved trauma, severe abandonment wounds, emotional instability, dependency, impulsivity, addiction, chaotic relationship histories, threats of self-harm, or even identity disturbance. Again, we're not diagnosing people, but patterns matter. And when someone in midlife collapse attaches to someone already struggling emotionally, the relationship can become combustible. You may see stuff like dramatic breakups and reunions, constant fighting, emotional blackmail, threats of leaving, jealousy spirals, triangulation, isolation, manipulative behavior, suicide threats, cycles of rage, and financial dependency. The left behind spouse often sees this and thinks, man, that relationship feels so dangerous. I'm actually worried about my spouse and their safety. Because that emotional instability is genuinely escalating. And you know what's really sad? The MLCer may eventually realize something feels wrong, but by then, they are emotionally entangled. They can't just up and leave this person who's dependent on them financially, emotionally. They may fear abandonment, exposure, shame, financial fallout, losing the fantasy, and the worst, admitting they destroyed their family for instability. Admitting they destroyed their family for nothing. So instead of leaving, they double down. And this is why some MLCers appear increasingly defensive, depressed, isolated, emotionally numb, irrational, paranoid, or even detached from reality, because the relationship itself becomes psychologically self-protective. To admit the truth would mean facing guilt, grief, regret, and you know what? Identity collapse all over again. So sometimes they cling harder to the fantasy, even while suffering inside it. And that is really heartbreaking for our spouses. Because when fantasy turns dark, it can be bad. There have been situations where highly unstable relationships escalated into domestic violence, coercive control, stalking, emotional abuse, financial exploitation, severe psychological deterioration, self-harm, blackmail, and even tragic criminal outcomes. And not because all APs are dangerous, but because emotionally unstable attachment systems can become extremely volatile under pressure, especially when fueled by dependency, addiction, unresolved trauma, shame, personality pathology, and emotional collapse. And again, this is where the left behind spouses often feel that their spouse may not be safe emotionally, psychologically, or financially, and that fear is real. The kids see it, family and friends see it, everybody can see it, and it's sad because there is no pulling them out of there to safety. The affair relationship may not actually be the happy ending everyone imagined, because healthy love usually produces stability, peace, accountability, emotional growth, honesty, integration. But when you've got two emotionally dysregulated people in the tunnel, you've got fragmentation, chaos, isolation, dependency, deception, jealousy, emotional volatility, and escalating dysfunction. And over time, everybody notices. And even when the MLCer notices, by then the psychological entanglement is just too deep for them to get out. And if you're listening tonight and you are feeling fear and worry for your former spouse, you're allowed to feel conflicted. Many left behind spouses simultaneously feel betrayed, traumatized, furious, heartbroken, and worried. And that doesn't make you weak or anything. It means you once genuinely loved that person. But you also cannot save someone who refuses reality. You can't rescue someone from a tunnel that they're still committed to remaining inside. At some point, the healthiest thing you can do is stop monitoring the chaos, stop trying to manage that instability, stop trying to outcompete the fantasy, and return focus to your own healing. Because many left behind spouses become psychologically trapped trying to watch the destruction unfold. And that destruction can consume you too. So, tonight's takeaway is this: not every tunnel relationship is built on healthy love. Some are built on emotional escape, trauma bonding, identity collapse, fantasy, dependency, and mutual emotional dysregulation. And while some eventually stabilize, others become emotionally destructive for everyone involved, including the MLCers themselves. So, Bomb Squad, just know you cannot control whether someone chooses healing or chaos, but you can choose not to lose yourself inside their collapse. This is Trina Laird, and you've been listening to MLC Bomb Drop and Beyond. And as always, stop chasing the blast, keep moving toward the light. We'll see you in the next episode. Hey guys, this is Trina, and I want to take a moment to speak directly to anyone who didn't choose the collapse but is living with the aftermath. When a spouse enters midlife crisis, the damage doesn't unfold slowly. It happens like an explosion. One day you're living a shared life with your best friend, and the next moment, that person that you have trusted and loved for so many years has emotionally disappeared almost overnight, rewriting history, minimizing the damage, and running from the very family they helped build. Friends are confused, the story gets simplified, and the spouse left behind is often expected to handle it quietly, gracefully, all while absorbing the fallout all alone. After the bomb drop, a survival guide for the left behind spouse was written for you. This book doesn't offer platitudes or false hope. It names what others avoid. Inside, I will walk you through what is actually happening when someone runs from themselves, why chasing answers only deepens the wound, and how to stabilize your life after emotional abandonment. In this book, we talk about why these departures feel so sudden and destabilizing, because in fact, they are destabilizing, and why the spouse who stays is often blamed, erased, or silenced. Why saving yourself is not abandonment, and how to grieve someone who is still alive while finding your footing again. This book does not promise reconciliation. It offers you guys something more necessary at this time, and that is stability. The Survival Guide for the Left Behind Spouse is available now on Amazon Kindle in both ebook and paperback. It's also available in audio version on Spotify. And if you're standing in the blast radius and wondering how to survive what you did not cause, this book was written for you. Hey, if you have a story you'd like to share with our listeners, or if you'd like to be a guest on the show, please email mlcbombdrop@gmail.com. Again, that's mlcbombdrop@gmail.com. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. The stories and events discussed in this podcast are for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or professional advice. Any names, locations, or identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. Any similarities to actual persons, living or dead, or real events are purely coincidental. The information presented on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Always consult with a qualified expert regarding any decisions related to your specific situation. The views expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the host or the podcast creators.